All right, we are doing area of trapezoids today. And I feel like this one might take me my full 15 minutes, so we are about to start rolling. All right, it's the ninth and it's area of trapezoids. All right, so a trapezoid, a lot of people get them confused with parallelograms, but they're not the same. Remember, parallelograms had two sets of congruent sides and parallel sides. All right. Nothing on a trapezoid has to be congruent. Okay. It can be, but they don't have to be. The one thing it is important, the two bases will always, and it's important that I'm capitalizing that because in math we don't say always very often because there's always that one time that like something happens, but this is an always time. The two bases will always be parallel to one another. All right, so no sides have to be congruent or anything like that, but you're always going to have two sides that are parallel. And whatever two sides are parallel, those are going to be your two bases. Okay, now this is the first shape that we've talked about having two different bases. So it's important that you recognize what those bases are. So our formula for area of a trapezoid is height times base 1 plus base 2 divided by 2. All right, a couple things to discuss. Like I've mentioned several times, usually I teach this at the end of the year when I've already taught a bunch of other things. So by then you would know when you have a letter beside parentheses, it means you're multiplying. So don't let that confuse you. Whatever number this is right here, you're going to multiply it by whatever you get on the inside. So figure out the inside stuff first and then multiply it by what's on the outside. So anytime a number or a letter is right beside a parenthesis, it just means you're multiplying. There's no symbol or anything in between them. Just when they're side by side, it means you're multiplying. Now, here's what I mean by base 1 and base 2. I just told you up here that you're going to have two bases. One of them's base 1, one of them's base 2. It really doesn't matter which one's which. If you say base 1's on the top, that's fine. If you say base 1's on the bottom, that's fine. As long as you know that there's two different bases, that's all you need to know. You'll plug in those two bases, add them together. Whatever you get, you're going to divide it by 2. And then whatever you get there, you multiply it times the height out here. Okay? So do everything on the inside of your parentheses first, and then multiply by this height that's on the outside. So just a couple trapezoids that you might come across to try to demonstrate what I'm talking about. All right, so this is a trapezoid, okay? This is a trapezoid because this line and this line are parallel. Those are your bases, okay? These two lines right here, they might be congruent, they might not, it doesn't matter. These lines are obviously not congruent, but they are parallel. So that tells you that these two right here are your bases. Now, just like before, they're going to give you all the information you need to know, okay? So this would be base 1, this would be base 2, and then just like before, in here is your height. You're still looking for that chair, okay? Your chair is right here, and your chair is going to tell you your base and your height, okay? All right, you might see it another way. Maybe you'll see it like this. Okay, this is also a trapezoid, okay, because this line and this line are parallel to each other. These two are not. If these two were parallel as well, then it would be a parallelogram because you'd have four sides that were parallel. But since it's just these two, then it's a trapezoid. Okay, so they're going to give you that. They might even put one up here as well, which just makes life even easier because you have two chairs to figure out your bases. So this would be base 1, this would be base 2, and this line would be your height. It doesn't matter that it's not dotted. Remember, just find your chair, and it's going to tell you your height or your base and your height. So this actually has a chair on both bases, which makes it even easier. Okay, so let's put some numbers with these. We got 3 examples we're going to do. All right, so let's draw this. Okay, here's my trapezoid. Now let me put some numbers with it. All right, so there's all my numbers. Let me rewrite my formula one more time so that I can have it. Also, the more you write it, the more likely you are to remember it. Okay? All right, so let's plug in what we know. Well, the first thing that I kind of like to do, and I saw some of you doing this as you submitted your assignments, you cross off the line or the number that you don't need, which I think is really beneficial because then it kind of eliminates one more thing that you have to get rid of. So remember, I don't need numbers that are on slanted lines, and I don't need numbers that aren't touching my chair. Okay, well, here's my chair, and here. Okay, so the only number that's not touching my chair, and that number's on a slanted line, is this 7 right here. So I'm going to cross it off because I don't need it anymore. It's just there to mess me up. All right, so now it's time to plug in what I do know. All right, well, even if you didn't know that 5 right here is your height, what you do know is your 2 bases, because remember, your 2 bases have to be parallel. So let's figure out the lines that are actually parallel to each other. Well, if we look at this one and this one, they're going to eventually cross. And obviously this line and this line cross, same with here. So the only 2 lines that are never going to cross, that are always going to be parallel, are the 6 and the 8. All right, so if I go ahead and plug those in for my 2 bases, and it's always divided by 2, well then if I've used these 2 numbers, then they're gone now. The only number left that could be my height is 5. Okay? But also remember, find your chair. Your chair is going to tell you all the numbers that you need. So here's the base of my chair, and 5 is the height of my chair. Okay, so now let's solve this. Remember, solve everything inside the parentheses first, and then we'll do the outside. So 6 plus 8 gives me 14. All right, 14 divided by 2 is 7. And remember, when you have a number beside a parenthesis, it just means you're multiplying. 5 times 7 leaves me with 35 centimeters squared. Okay, let's try another one. All right. Okay, here's my trapezoid. There's my formula. Okay, so I'm looking for 3 numbers. I'm looking for a height, and I'm looking for 2 bases. That 2 right there is never going to change. It's always going to be a 2. All right, let's plug in some numbers. We've got all right. So let's figure out, what is the one number that I do not need? What is the one number that's not touching a chair and it's on a slanted line? And hopefully you see that that's the 14. The 14 is not being used for anything. The 14 is just there to mess you up. Okay? So now let's identify my 2 bases. All right, what are the 2 lines that are parallel to each other? They're never going to touch. Okay? Well, that's here and here. But also, even if you weren't sure, remember, here are your chairs. Well, what 2 numbers are your chairs sitting on? Well, this chair up here is sitting on a 3. This chair down here is sitting on a 7. And it's always divided by 2. Okay? Well, if I've used the 3, I've used the 7. The 14 isn't getting used at all. The only number left to be my height is 12. But also, like I said, the 12 is touching your chair, so it has to be used at some point. All right, let's do the inside of the parentheses first. 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 times 5 gives me 60. Okay? All right, one more. We've got this way. Okay. Put some numbers in. All right, I've got all my sides labeled. Rewrite my formula real quick. So now it's time to plug things in. All right. What's the one side that's not being used at all? Okay, well, here's my chair. Even if you'd drawn your chair, I'm gonna see if I can do this without messing you up. Like, even if you'd drawn it going this way, it would still be the same numbers that are being touched. So don't let that mess you up. Like, if you drew your chair with the base down here, that wouldn't have messed you up. So just understand that you can draw it either way. All right, and now what number is not being used? Well, the one number not being used is this 12 down here. So it's on a slanted line. I don't need it. It's not touching a chair. Okay. What are my two bases? What are the two lines that are parallel that are never going to touch each other? Well, that's going to be these sides right here. So those two have to be my bases. So if I have 8 and 4, so if I used 8 and 4, 12 is not being used at all. The only number left to be my height is 10. All right. And now we'll solve it. 8 plus 4 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 10 times 6 is 60. All right, so probably the most important thing that you're going to have to remember is finding those two bases. Find those two lines that are parallel. Find those two lines that are never going to run into each other, and those are your two bases. From there, it's easy to identify what number has to be your height, and then remember, you just ignore the other number that doesn't get used at all. Okay?